Hello, I'm George Gonzalez. I'm obsessed with making games. And today is Multiplayer Monday. So we're going to dive into one multiplayer aspect, something that can help you. Today we're going to go over networked avatars, specifically with your player controller, your cosmetics. So if you want to switch up the cosmetics or the mesh render, colors, materials, whatever it is that you want to change for your avatar, so that other people can see it. Because in multiplayer games, most of the times players are going to want to adjust their avatars or have different settings that they can do so that they can show off. And uh, even in League of Legends, a lot of the times, if you focus on the social aspects rather than the gameplay, you can have a good monetization system. So I want to go over that. And it's different in VR than it is in regular games. So we're going to go over Fusion, and I have two samples to show you. So we have my game, that's a VR game, and then we have the social hub example from Fusion. Okay, so this is like a simple knight character. You can find, if you go online on Photon Fusion documentation, you go in Fusion 2 and you go on technical samples, there's a social hub. And I mentioned this before, but this has a lot of nice features. It doesn't have customizations for the knight, but I wanted to show you how much simpler it is in non-VR games. Non-VR games, you have a player controller, and you have, just like you have in regular Unity games, and you can just network that, because all you have to do is network the interactions and the movement. Okay, and this script grabs the inputs. You can look at it; it's super simple. It's the job done. And so you can do the cosmetic in here, like in this network controller character, or you can create another script that says player cosmetics as a network object and have all the references to the nine helmet and swap out helmets. And so the things that I'm going to show you today apply to both. Just know that in a non-VR game, you just have one player controller. Whereas in VR, because of the rig, you have your regular rig that has all your local movement, because in VR, you are constantly moving and you need that feedback without any restrictions to the Fusion side. You don't want to have lag, you don't want to see anything like that. And so you need to have your own control so that there's no restrictions in your movement. And then you have the Fusion rig, and that's what we're gonna. And that component has all the network stuff. And yes, I could change this to have all the cosmetics set up in a different script. But because I'm connecting to the local player stuff, I have easy access in here. But you could do it how you want. So let's go into the script and talk about what do we do to change cosmetics. As you know, in here, you see my guy. I set it up so that we could swap out stuff. Let's see, so we could change the scarf, and it's just a mesh, and I have this empty controller. So anytime I set something, this is good for when you're swapping cosmetics and you want to figure out, okay, how am I going to set up my rig to allow for cosmetic swaps? And this is how you do an empty locator or transform somewhere in your rig so that the 3D artist that will model this will model it so that the pivot is on the specific here, right? This one's not set up super right because the pivot is down here, but the mesh is set there. So that way, if I do 0, 0, 0, it will line up. And this one, you can tell it doesn't line up. And so this was not a good job on the red, because you want it to be 0, 0, 1, 1, 1 and have it work within that realm. Okay. So that's one thing, is that you always want to have it no crazy move transforms, because then that makes it harder for LODs or for visual like occlusion, other things that pertain to the rig or not, whatnot. It just makes things simpler. So that way people don't mess with it, or if they do, they're like, oh, how do I align this perfectly? Well, I don't know where it is. So if you can zero out the values and have it work, that's the best. The other thing, so that's what it is. So that way I can model a square in here, 3L cube, and as long as I have it, let me see. So as long as I have it, like this, there's a scale change, obviously, but if I like accidentally move it, I can just zero it out and it's right there, right? And so I can swap things and parent it to that empty object and be able to swap out cosmetics just fine. Because if you have 100 different cosmetics, you can swap them all in and out that easy because you have that parent. Okay. So dependencies and whatnot. Then after you have all the setup, in here, I'm going to show you some of the things that we do. A lot of times cosmetics have IDs. And so your first thought is I'm going to have a network string that holds the value. And then like in here, these are actually hex values. So that's why in here the capacity is set to 6, because I only need 6 numbers. With strings and Fusion specifically, and when you have a different multiplayer pack, you want to look into this. Like, okay, network strings, do I need to cap it or not? Because a lot of times if you just have unlimited access to strings, you don't know how much memory you are allocating. So Fusion is guarding you from using too much. And I think this limitation might be in every network solution, but I'm not sure. But this is something to think about when you're doing network, is what are you networking? and how much information are you sending, like really? Because if you don't have a cap, then what is the cap by default? And that's something you need to figure out. In Fusion, they ask you to set it. And because they want to allocate memory ahead of time. So that's a good thing. So that way, so you have limits. This is great also for IDs. If you're going to do like a cosmetic ID, oftentimes artists might like long, funny IDs or whatever, but this is not the place, right? You want to make sure you're able to find the cosmetic, and you need to talk about the limitations. But because I like saving memory, usually what you can do is if you have multiple lists, right now I have an int, I could have a byte if I wanted to. I need to organize this, it's not done. But the idea with an int is that you're not saving a whole lot of strings, so you can save on data, and it might be even better to do byte. But because you don't, if you have, right now I have an int because I'll have different cosmetics and they're all in one list, one big bucket of cosmetic list. So there will be more than 128. But if I split them up, I know I won't have more than 128 row patterns or whatever. So that's up to you and knowing how many cosmetics are you going to have, and trying to figure that out. But the reason I do this is because I prefer holding a small amount of data and just swapping like grabbing the rest of the information from the game. But if you want, you can use a string and you can limit it. Usually in our previous games, we've limited it to like 12 or capacity size. You can change that, or 15. Those are usually good amount. You have enough to give a unique ID to the cosmetic. And if you do that, you can just look up the cosmetic by ID in the project. So there's no problem with that. And that is actually easy. So what happens on Fusion, you can say on change render. So when this value changes, it'll call that function. And so instead of having an update loop, constantly looking over, what you have is when these values get updated, you'll get notified. And it's the same with this render pattern. So this is the one that we've actually done. So what happens is I have a Boolean, and this is on the local player. It'll trigger and it'll say, okay, I equipped a new row pattern. Okay, and if the ID is empty, usually that means I removed it. And so what I set the pattern to -1, and then I set the ID to that. Now, if the row pattern is -1, it'll set the pattern to null. And I do -1 because sometimes you'll get 0 as an index, so I just don't want to accidentally trip over that. So, and then I have in here, this is the list, right? So I have this list of cosmetics, and I have an ID. And so I try to get the index so that I can return it. And this scriptable object is on every player. The main thing with a multiplayer game is that you will have, let's say like in this, if I split this window, you will have your local player and the other player. So what happens is you'll see in here in the render in the material is that I'm creating a new material. And the reason for this is because if you change the material directly that's on file, it'll change the cosmetic for all, it'll change the material for all the players because every rig is using the same material. And so what you do is create a new instance of the material and swap it. So that's how you do textures overlay. With the cosmetic, you can just change the rig here. And that's why we have a separate thing in here than we do for the local player, is because there's a lot of information that can happen and change with a VR rig. So this rig right here on the local player will not be visible because the local player has its own rig. So this is like a clone of that, and it displays to all the other players. So this is like the window to my player for everyone else. And so you have to take into account that some players might join later, right? And so, okay, so here's where things start getting interesting, and I want to share this so that you understand. In Fusion, you have this on-spawn. You can't use on-start. In Fishnet and other network solutions, you'll have a similar thing. It'll be on-spawn. And in here, this is what updates everyone. So when, let's say you join a game, you're playing with 2 other people, and someone joins late and they see you. Okay, this gets triggered on them when they see you for the first time, right? Because they spawn a network object, so they spawn this. And you have to understand that not everyone's going to have everything loaded at the same time. And so you can't assume that they have the variables. And so what you do is the state authority, the one that you will load these variables. But the only way these variables get shown across, for example, this meta ID is a network string, and the capacity is 30, because the names and the IDs might be longer. But these are set, right? And so then what happens so anytime I get it after, it'll be fine. What happens is that oftentimes when you start, you can't assume that the value has been set. And so what I do in here, I do subscribe to where the row pattern changes. Okay, so if the local player changes its pattern, I'll subscribe. But I also need to check what the current pattern is. And so I just load the same function that I subscribe to. I say, okay, like let's check what the row pattern is right now and load it. Right? But as long as you set the ID, right? As long as I set the ID with the state authority, it will update to everyone. And so when this spawns, it will have the right variables, but they will only be read-only for the other player. So another player, even though these are public, like let's say someone tries to change your values from their game, like they hack or they try to change the player, even though they can see the values, it will give them an error. And so they can't. Oftentimes that doesn't happen. But what happens is that sometimes we mess up as developers and think that things are happening on one end when they're not. And so you have to be very aware of that. I have a lot of things in here that I set up on the get-go. But this is what I do. When I add a level up mechanic, I say, okay, I need to subscribe to that. And I need to do a check to make sure I updated the value to the correct level. And so I don't assume anything, right? I subscribe to the event and I check the value. I have both ground cover. And that's the same with anything that you're changing on the player. You have the spawn mechanic, you have the if has state authority to know that it's you, and then I return because all this stuff is for the other players. So this is for the players that are like coming in. The other players coming in and it says, okay, like I set all these values to default if they're the other player. And the reason for this is because I have a mask or a layer that I set the player to, so the local player can't see the fusion rig. And that way I change this to default for the other player so they can see you. That way you're not seeing your own face in there twice or your arms twice. You just, because you have your local rig and the other rig. In your own character controller, you don't have to do that because there's just one. But you might have different layers locally than you have on the other, maybe. And that depends on your game. Like if it's a first camera, like if you have a multiplayer first-person shooter, then you will have a different local player than the rig because the cameras are different. Like everyone else sees you as the third person, but the first person is different. And that's something that's interesting thing to think about in multiplayer games with first-person shooters is that your first-person camera, and then you have an avatar that's like 3D or like it's a full body rig. So how to match those up. But the reality is that the first-person shooter, the first-person camera is the one that matters because that's where you're aiming. The other one can kind of show what you're doing. It doesn't have to be like super accurate. But we can do things to make it accurate. For example, if you have a laser and you want to show that laser to others so they know that you're, if you want to do something like that, you could. And make sure it's accurate. But that is it, okay? We have the fixed update network rate for Fusion. If you are manipulating things like inputs, like in this case, I'm transferring the transforms or the VR rig, you want to do it on fixed update network because that will make sure that the transforms match on the network because everything's done at different orders, like fixed update network, or like update. And so this is what you need to make sure that it's as accurate as it can. If you just put an update or even fixed update, it will look janky. And so this is something to be aware of, especially when you're saying like, why is my stuff not updating? And usually when you spawn an object in Fusion, it does not spawn it in the specific position because it doesn't have that information. So you still need to do a network transform if you want to make sure players are seeing the rig where it's supposed to. In this case scenario, because I have these transforms, I'm updating it manually. But if you have, like, let's say you spawn a crate and start dropping, that spawn, even if you set the position on spawn, it will not network across because that's just a spawn to tell Fusion where to spawn it. What you need is a network transform. So to make sure that it's constantly updating the position. Now, if you don't want to do that and you want to do it on fixed update, you can do that or set it at the beginning, all for everybody. The only thing is that you have to do it on spawn because remember, if I spawn a crate, right, and someone joins after the fact that it spawned, it will trigger this spawn thing. So you have to make sure that you have that variable saved somewhere in that transform position where you spawn the crate, so that or where it is currently. Because if it's falling, you're gonna have to set that. And so those are things to think about that usually in single players you don't have to. It's like, what's going on with my avatar, my controller? And usually you're like, oh, why are things not where they're supposed to be? And it's just an understanding of what the network solution is doing. And I've come to learn by trial and error what Fusion does with spawning, with transforms, with syncing on fixed update, and setups. And this is obviously a VR setup, so there's a lot of things that I have to do and connect that you don't have to do in the character controller. Like to get it working, you can have a character controller from the sample. Like this is the character controller from Fusion. As you can see, they have the velocity and other things, and they only have this. like for the on spawn. So it's pretty bare bones, and it has the gravity and acceleration. It has all those regular play controller things, and then you have a teleport, a jump. So it's you can look at the sample, you can use that as a default and move around with WASD. With VR, it's a little bit heavy, so that's why I like to talk about VR, because it's harder. And when you get into regular games, it's like a breeze. It's like super easy because you don't have to deal with a lot of the things that VR has to do with tracking, controllers, and headset. It's a lot more standardized with non-VR. So hopefully this helped you with avatars. Next week we will go on another topic. If you have a question on a specific network solution that you'd like me to go over, I will do that. If you need help with your multiplayer game, I have a community and game devs. The resources are there, so that the main point is for you. You have no excuse to make your games, and I'm here to help you. I have the community, I have YouTube. You're welcome to comment and talk about the things that you want to learn about with multiplayer games. What game do you want to build? Make a list of multiplayer mechanics that you want to learn, and I'll put them on the video. I'll make a sample. I'll try to figure something out to help you understand the network solutions and what's out there. We'll see you next week.